So it's depending on where you are in the world, it might be good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. So hello everyone, and I'm very excited to have you here with us today to learn more about building an analytics team, building an insights team, and uh, I'm here today with Brian Clifton, and I've known Brian for a few years now, and I've been a big fan of his books. I've been a big fan of his blog, and I met Brian a number of times at various engagements at Google Analytics Summit, and always been fascinated by his insights and the way he shares his presentation. So I'm very excited to have him here with us today and share his brilliance with us. Brian, thank you so much for joining us. Just a
My
few
pleasure.
housekeeping items. Brian, we don't see your screen anymore.
Ah, forgive me. No,
While
something's
Brian
happened.
is setting up, if you have questions about today's topic about building analytics team or some of the challenges that you're experiencing in your organization while building a team, please share them inside the panel with us, and I will make sure to ask them at the end of the presentation. The webinar will be quite interactive. Brian prepared a few slides about this topic, and at the end, we will be asking Brian questions that were submitted to us via registration form. So how did this webinar come about? Earlier this year, Brian released his newest book, Successful Analytics, Gain Business Insights by Managing Google Analytics. And I remember I was actually getting on a plane when I just downloaded it from a store, from Amazon Kindle store, and I read it while flying to San Francisco. And this was the easiest flight ever because the book was just so interesting, so amazing, gave me so many different insights. But I'm not sure if you feel the same way. But every time I read the book, always towards the end of the book, I feel, well, only if I could ask the writer just a few more questions, just some questions that I still have about that book. How amazing would it be? Well, today we will have that opportunity. So if you still have not read this book, highly recommend you pick it up, you read it. And yeah, and Brian actually gave us a 20% coupon. Just a little bit about us and who we are. My name is Michael Loban, and I'm with company InfoTrust. InfoTrust is web analytics consultancy and technology vendor, and we love analytics. We work with hundreds of different organizations across the world, helping them be better at collecting information, at analyzing information, and turning information into actionable insights. And we do a lot of different training programs, webinars, educational seminars to share our knowledge. And in this case, we invite amazing people like Brian to share his knowledge. A little bit about Brian. Brian has worn many analytics hats over the past years. He's been a best-selling author of excellent books on analytics. He is the founding head of web analytics for Google Europe. He is a strategist. He's really a person who I deeply admire and whose insights I value in this field. So at this point, let me turn this over to Brian. And again, at any point, if you have questions, please list them in a chat panel, and we will make a note of them, and we will ask Brian all of them at the end of his presentation. Thank you and enjoy.
Thanks, Michael. I just want to double check you can see my screen.
Yes, we can.
Okay, good stuff. Let me go straight into it. Thank you for that glowing introduction, Michael. Very kind of you to say that. Please do take a look at the book. The shortened URL is there. It's a 20% discount to anyone listening today. And yeah, I would love to get your feedback if you have a chance to read it. So this discussion is, as you know, about building an insights team or building an analytics team, and I'll talk about why the naming is important in a second. It's come together over, well, many years, really. I've been doing this, more years than I care to think, more than 10 years, that's for sure. When I joined Google in 2005, just before Google Analytics was launched, I was the first head of analytics for Europe, and my first thing to do was to build an analytics team within Google. So I started there, and since leaving that company, I've also built teams for my own purposes in my own organization, and also for clients and agencies. So really the combination of that 10 years or so experience of building teams I've put down in the book. It's in chapter 8, and this discussion is really a summary of that chapter. I have quite a simple agenda. We'll talk about naming and why my title slide was originally analytics team and changed a little bit to insights team. I'll talk about that. Positioning, a little bit about positioning, and just sort of setting the groundwork, if you like, the foundations of where teams fit and where to position them in an organization. And then we'll get to the nitty gritty of building it. What is the dream team if you had the resources for that and aspired to that? But if you don't, what is a minimum team, the minimum requirements that you kind of need, and how to scale between the two. And I'll finish off talking a little bit about recruitment, about how you find good analysts. So we kick off in terms of what's in a name and why to worry about this. I talk about this. It's funny actually. In the book, I just talk about this in passing. It's just a paragraph or so about naming the team and just getting that right and essentially setting expectations. I've said last sort of 6 months since I finished the book, I've been talking to organizations, and it turns out the naming is a lot more significant and a lot more important to organizations than I actually originally thought. So we've all sort of called ourselves analytics team or the data team or the Google Analytics team and so on, because it's what we do, and we like to tell people exactly what we do, so it's clear. But actually, it doesn't really help people outside of our team understand what we do, because it's more about what we can provide them. What can we provide the C-suite or the CEO or the CMO? What can we as a team provide the marketing departments or the strategy department? And if you name your team, I mean, I happen to prefer insights. Insights team is what I use in the book, what I use a lot for myself. Or the ROI team is a good name, or digital performance team. You're really sort of setting expectations that you're not just here to collect data. You're not just a bunch of report monkeys who just spew out data to people when they ask it without any insights. If you can really set the stage and say, look, we're here to help you grow your business, be it more revenue or more customers or more returning customers, you really set expectations. And when you do that, then you have stakeholders knocking at your door, and the more stakeholders, the more potential investment you're going to have. And everything has to be driven by investment. So my recommendation here is naming. It's not something I've given a huge amount of thought before. I wrote the book and called it the Insights Team to be something that you aspire to. It turns out a lot of organizations really struggle when they call themselves a data team. So just think about that if you're building from scratch, how you can name and position yourselves better in terms of what you aspire to, rather than what your day-to-day job is. No one really cares about what the day-to-day analytics team does. They want to see the results. And then once you have a name and you kind of got the expectations right, where does your team fit? And this is about aligning yourself with a particular department. Now, there's a number of here I've listed here: the outsource, the marketing, communications, sales, strategy, operations, and IT, etc. And there may be others within your organization. The most common that I come across is people simply outsource their analytics requirement. They don't do it internally. Either they don't have a budget, or it's they don't have the staff, or it's early days and they need to prove their case before they can invest. Outsourcing, just giving this to somebody else, is the most common scenario. I'd certainly recommend, if you're doing that and there's no harm in doing that at all. That you work with what we call a GACP, Google Analytics Certified Partner. You might have seen this badge when InfoTrust were talking about themselves. They are one. There's a global network of some 200 or 300 now. The advantage of these guys working with partners, they're official Google certified, so they know the product and they have access to Google, they know what's coming around the corner, and they have a lot of experience. And because of that, partners can really jumpstart an implementation. So you sign a contract one day, the next day, a partner could be working on your account, setting up your data, and doing it in a best practice way, and learning from their mistakes that they made 10 clients ago. So in other words, you get good quality, clean data from the get-go and a lot of experience. But the caveat in all of that is that you must still take responsibility. Don't just outsource 100% of all your analytics. You do need an internal resource or resources, people in other words, to help coordinate that relationship and work with that relationship. The danger is if you just outsource everything, you end up working in a silo. And that's something you really want to avoid, and I'll talk about that in a second. So good to use. A lot of people use outsourcing. It doesn't have to be a GACP. I certainly recommend that just because of the skills base required, but also allocate resources. The other areas you could align your department with, in other words, report to or get your budget from, is what I'm talking about here. You could work with marketing and communications. I mean, it's a natural fit because website and digital is usually a function of marketing. So it's kind of a place where often the conversation about data starts. That can work, and it can work very well as long as digital really is the focus of the marketing team. It's not just some afterthought. It's not a minor part of what they're doing. It's a major part. So TV ads, offline ads, whatever, digital ads, all driving traffic to some kind of digital touch point. Could be an app, usually your website. If that's really the driver of the marketing team, then great. You could have a happy place aligning a team within the marketing group. Another place, certainly if you're e-commerce, if you're transactional based, and that is a significant part of the business, then it's clearly a very good choice to position the team or align the team with sales. E-commerce, salespeople, they live and breathe by numbers. They're very number orientated. They're very focused on improving and making anything that can increase revenue, increase number of customers or returning customers. If you sit within that team or align yourself or get your budget from the sales department, you will have a good relationship in terms of being able to rapidly have your recommendations absorbed, perhaps get some really intelligent suggestions and questions back, and you'll be able to implement recommendations that you make. So if you have a recommendation of changing a funnel or somehow rejigging the funnel process, you'll get a lot of buy-in from the sales team to make quick actions. Another area potentially to look at is strategy and operations. If you have such a department in your organization, that can work very good because data is what people need in order to plan for the future, and is very much part of operational needs. Again, it does need to be a significant part of the business model. So if you have lots of shops, lots of stores, and digital is a sort of add-on to that, then it maybe not be a good fit. And the reason being is strategy and operations tend to work on long-term timescales. They're looking at how to position the company next year, next 3 years, next 5 years. So if digital is not a big part of the business, in other words, you're not a pure play digital provider, for example, or it's not a significant part of the business model, you can find it difficult putting the team in that place just because of the time scales that people are working to. And the last one, which is the IT department, which historically has been where analytics has fit. Certainly, going back when I started off in the industry in the early 2000s, analytics sat with the IT team because they were complex tools and they needed a lot of setup, and they were boring, non-visual reports to look at, and were very sort of IT type focused reports. I can't stress enough in terms of avoiding that, in terms of avoiding positioning within IT. I just want to be clear, though. Absolutely, IT is a very, very important stakeholder that I'll come on to talk to in the next slide. All of these people here are important stakeholders to have on board. But the question is, where does the team sit? Where does your budget come from? Who do you report to? IT is not the place for that. The caveat being, I guess, unless IT already has a tight integration with marketing. You know, IT guys, they focus on making things work. They keep the lights on. Basically, they make sure transaction happens, that the platform is secure, robust, and fast. The nuances of data structure and visitor journeys is not something that they're focused on. So it's a difficult fit to be in there. Although, as I say, as a stakeholder, they're very, very important. So nothing against IT, just saying avoid aligning your analytics team there. A key problem I've seen and come across many times actually is the fact that data sits in a silo. I alluded to it a little bit earlier with the use of outsourcing analytics and being careful not to outsource 100% of everything, because you end up with data just operating in a silo. And I'm just going to illustrate this quickly with a report pulled straight out of Google Analytics, actually. This is a multi-channel funnels report. It's a very simplified one. It's looking at the overlap between 3 different marketing channels. So paid search, visitors coming from AdWords, for example, organic search, and affiliates. Now, what marketing teams are essentially trying to do is figure out what is the best mix, the best marketing mix, either to get the most customers or to get the most revenue or to be the most efficient. In other words, not to throw money down the drain with your marketing spend. That's a big part of what marketing is trying to achieve in digital. And as we see time and time again, if you open these type of reports in Google Analytics, customers rarely discover you in a silo. In other words, they rarely just do organic search, go land on your website and go, aha, this is the website for me, I'll become a customer straight away. They use multiple channels. This is very simplified. It could be a lot more. Email marketing, for example, social media marketing and conversations, advertising on YouTube, even offline marketing could be included in here. So this Venn diagram can get a lot more complex. And I'll just illustrate there, the overlaps. Area A there is just to show that here the visitors came to the website twice, or at least twice. And they came where the overlap is, area A, they came via organic search and paid search. And that was before they became a customer. So they became twice, 2 different channels, and they became a customer. Area B is organic and affiliates, and C is affiliates and paid search, and area D in the center there is where all 3 overlap. So imagine if you had 5 or 6 of these different spheres. The overlaps get very complicated, and as I say, the marketing mix, how big these circles are and how they should overlap or not, is really what marketing are trying to achieve. So the point is, visitors or customers don't find you in a silo, so don't treat your data in a silo. Otherwise, you end up seeing only a very, very small piece of the pie. So avoiding that is really about integrating with stakeholders. This group of stakeholders here, very similar to the slide you saw before about aligning. These are people who have an interest in what you do in the data and want to use it for their own purposes. They are your potential investors. The more stakeholders you have, yes, the more work you have to do, but it also means the more investment that you need to do it. Where do you get your investment from? Your stakeholders is the best place to go to. I'll caveat that by saying that if you are lucky enough in your organization to have a business intelligence team, you will probably centralize everything in there and get your budget from there. But most organizations don't have that. So you have to pool your resources and take money from wherever the need is. And understanding your stakeholder needs as well as your team capabilities is one of the sort of first things you need to map out. I like to use this radar type diagram where you map out your different stakeholders there on the outside and then the capabilities the capabilities that fit the need, the request, if you like, from those stakeholders ranges from 0 to 5. So in my example diagram there for my fictional team, you can see that we can support marketing pretty strongly. We're number 4 there out of 5, so they have good support. Sales not so good. Strategy and operations a little less as I go around here clockwise. IT and web development not so good either. PR and communications, they're getting very little love from this team. There's just no resource, no capability there, and a little better for consumer insights and customer service. So your stakeholders may differ, and they'll each have their own requirements. But the first thing to do is to map out what you have in place at the moment. And that requires an internal resource. You need someone here to coordinate who the stakeholders are, who they should be, how they consume data, what level are they at, how advanced are they at consuming data, mapping out their needs and mapping out the capabilities. And this is really important to have that because even if you have a completely outsourced provider of analytics, you still need this internal resource to coordinate everything and to make sure that the third-party provider understands the business need and the business understand the caveats associated with collecting data. Because not always can you collect the exact data point or have an exact answer to the question. You need to infer or approximate. So you need people internally to coordinate. That brings me nicely onto staff. So we talked about a lot about positioning and naming and stakeholders, partners, and you need somebody internally as well. And who are these and how many? I've often been requested that if I had unlimited budget, unlimited resource, what kind of team would I build for an organization? And I've given this some thought over the years, and I've come up with these 5 key roles that need to be fulfilled. That doesn't mean the team has to be 5 people. It could be more. For example, you may have more than one person doing one role, but these are the 5 key roles. If you wanted to have a team that could pretty much answer any question, that could pretty much optimize any part of the sales funnel once the visitor's on the website, or optimize any part of the marketing visitor acquisition. If you wanted a team to be able to do that, you'd need these 5 roles covered. So let's look at that then. So senior manager in the middle there, we'll come to that in a second. Let's look at these 5 people and what they do. The first one that usually joins the team, who starts off, is what we call a tactical marketing analyst. Tactical just means that they do day-to-day activity. They're there figuring out, okay, what are we doing today? What are we doing tomorrow? What's happening now, in other words? And they're part of the marketing team, so they're focusing on understanding the marketing mix. That Venn diagram that I showed earlier, pretty much adjusting those bubble sizes. Should they be bigger? Should they be smaller? Should there be stronger overlaps? Should there be less overlap? What is the best mix? What is the most efficient cost? And they will be involved in a lot of experimentation. Could be A/B, could be multivariate. But they really understand what's happening here and now and planning how to adjust that and optimize that. Now, closely aligned with that and working alongside them is what we call the strategic marketing analyst. This is very similar at the end of the day to the tactical marketing analyst, but they have a broader scope and a longer time frame. So this person would potentially bring together other data sources. It could be competitor research, it could be market research and surveys. They bring together other data and evaluate the best marketing mix long term. In other words, what can we do better next year, for example? They will also be involved in a lot of testing and experimentation as well. And they'll be good at forecasting. The data scientist there is a senior person. If you're a senior manager taking responsibility for data, this person would be your number 2. essentially. They would be your chief storyteller and the person that would be the overseer of all analytical methods. So they have a strong scientific or statistical background. And if you were to build the dream team from scratch, if you had the resource to do this straight away, this person you would probably hire first because they would set the overall direction from an analytical point of view and therefore help you recruit the other people to this team. A technical analyst, well, this is by the definition someone more technical. They're responsible for all the data collection, the automation of it, integration and quality control. And you may say, well, isn't all that taken care of by GA? And yes, to a great extent it is. But when you're working with analytics and driving business forward for an organization, you often work with more than one tool. And even if you only work with one or two tools, you often want to extract data out of quite a complex interface, such as Google Analytics. It's not a simple tool to use by any stretch of the imagination. So you may want to pull the interesting parts that are relevant to you or your stakeholder out of Google Analytics via an API call and place it somewhere else in a dashboard. Maybe it's alongside some survey data or some competitive analysis data. So that's what I mean by integration. Automating that, of course, you can do that manually once, but if you want this updated in real time or once a week or whatever, you'll want some kind of automation. So this person has a web developer background, understands how to integrate, understands how to set up API calls, perhaps has good database query skills, and is responsible for data collection and quality control. Now, this can be part-time, um, not necessarily to be a full-time role. If you're a single website, single domain name, no e-commerce, then certainly you don't need a full-time person in this role. But if you have multiple domains, perhaps covering different markets, different regions of the world, different states, you operate in multiple currencies, you have different storefronts, so lots of transactions going on. It becomes more and more important that you have a technical person there full-time. Well, certainly part-time is an option. And then the conversion optimization analyst. This is a person who identifies on-site factors. So once the visitors arrived on your website and all the marketing analysts have done their stuff in terms of making sure it's the best, most qualified leads they can bring to the website, this person really looks at improving the sales funnel. In other words, once they land on the website, how do you get them to convert? How do you get them to become a lead or become a customer? They usually have a good background in web design, website architecture, and of course testing. The senior manager there in the middle, that obviously has to manage this team. They're still analytical, but they're not. They may not be digitally analytical. They may have never been a web analyst. They're more of a broader sort of business analyst. That's who that person would be. So great if you have the budget and you have the wherewithal to build your dream team. What if your needs are smaller? What if you either can't afford or you just don't require full-time staff in these roles? Well, the first thing is you can replace some of these roles, and these are the typical ones that are replaced by your partner, by your Google Analytics certified partner. Um, it's expensive to hire people, and it's difficult to keep them, and we'll come on to that in a second. But certainly, day-to-day tactical marketing and longer-term strategic marketing are usually the things that you want to keep in-house because you need to know these people. You need to see them and look at them in the eyes and see them every day and have the conversations with them and the meetings and perhaps the side conversations, the kind of water cooler conversations where sometimes ideas happen. Um, you really want to try and keep them in-house. The other things are not quite as important, so that the data scientist doesn't have to be someone that's full-time resident in your organization. It can be someone that is an overseer of things for you. The technical side of things, the outsourcing of data quality, that can be done via a partner. And conversion optimization, very good to work with an agency stroke partner. Someone who goes in there, has a specific project to optimize a landing page or group of landing pages, and then you look at the results. So certainly this can be outsourced. You don't have to have all roles covered internally, and I would certainly recommend you fill holes in with your partner. The other question I've been asked before, and I cover this in the book as well, is, what about a statistician? I mean, this is data. Shouldn't statisticians be involved? Um, yes, if you can find a statistician that wants to join the web analytics team, absolutely, bring them on board. They would be, potentially the data scientist in all of this. Um, The reason why I hesitate is that a lot of the statistical heavy lifting is done by tools for you. So Google Analytics does a lot of this for you. A/B and multivariate testing tools, the statistics is built in. It's quite standard stuff, been around decades. So you certainly need an understanding of statistical methods, and all of these people, all of these analysts will have some kind of numerical statistical background. It's just a statistician is not their role. So you have good, if you recruit correctly, you will have good statistical methodologies in place. It's just not something that you would do on a day-to-day basis. So my thoughts are that a statistician brought into the web analytics tool, given the fact that the tools do a lot of the stats for you, a statistician will be bored. So I don't think it's necessary to recruit a statistician. So I've talked about the dream team, and how fantastic it will be to have those roles. And if you haven't, okay, you can fill the holes with a partner. What's the minimum team? The min team, as I call it. And this is what I put forward for the minimum team. You clearly have to have a senior manager involved. You have to have a senior stakeholder. Um, if you don't have that, if you don't have somebody as like head of marketing or head of strategy and operations, or somehow in the C-suite of the company, you're going to struggle. You are just going to be puking reports, which may generate excitement the first couple of times you send out, but over time, within a year, no one's really going to be paying attention. After all, they've seen it all before. You need a senior manager as a sponsor to help you grow, help you bring in the stakeholders, and help gain further investment. So alongside that, you have the partner. You have to have a partner to fill in the holes, because you still need those 5 areas covered. And then below that, we have the internal team, which is a junior. You can start with a junior tactical marketing analyst and someone that can serve a more technical role. So I have here a web developer, someone that's helped build the website, perhaps working in a part-time capacity. So the GACP is the company that drives the data collection, drives the analysis and the recommendations. They are external to your organization. So of course they're going to work remotely and perhaps come and see you once a quarter, once a month, or whatever, but they're not there day to day. You have a junior tactical marketing analyst, so someone that works 2 ways, works very strongly with the GACP, communicates the business requirements to the partner. They're there within the business. They know the stakeholders face to face. So they can communicate the requirements of what data is required and how it's going to be used to the partner, and also communicate backwards. Okay, this is the data in place, this is what it means, and this is how we're going to use it to answer the question. So that needs to be communicated back to the business and to the stakeholders, because it's not a simple, oh, here's my question, what's the answer? Often when you ask an analyst a question, you get a question back because it needs to be qualified. And so there's, with data and with good analysis comes action items. You want to make change. You want to be a hero and be the person credited with growing the business or growing sales. So you need someone that owns that. And that's what the tactical marketing analyst will do, and will coordinate it and make sure things get done and prioritized correctly. It is a full-time position. Having somebody do this 1 day a week, I've seen this happen so many times, and it fails every time. You grab a junior marketer from the marketing team and you say, hey, 1 day a week you're going to do some analytics. At this kind of level, when you want to be serious about data and its interpretation, that just doesn't work. Google Analytics is a complex beast now, constantly changing, highly evolving product. In fact, if you think about it, Google Analytics now is 10 years old. I was involved when it first launched, and you would have thought by now that the pace of development would have slowed down. If anything, it's accelerating. It's phenomenal the amount of resource engineer time that Google has given it to really grow it into a class leading product. So unless you are working this full time, and even if you are working full time, it's very easy to fall behind on the latest techniques and the technologies and the features and be able to take advantage of them. So even at a junior level, this is somebody that needs to be there full time, working within the business to make things happen, working with the partners to make sure that it's aligned with the business, and also to be able to sanity check the data and make sure things are working correctly as people want. And then the last one there is the web developer. This is someone that's taking responsibility for implementing the tracking code. Um, Things are a lot easier these days with something called Google Tag Manager. You don't have to keep going back and modifying pages to implement tracking these days if you have that. But it's still a complex job, and it's not something you take on unless you sort of understand web development. So they're there to do that, implement tracking, provide technical support. And, as I've said before, this is not really a full-time role until you are a much more complex organization in terms of tracking, e-commerce and multiple domains and subdomains and things like that. So that's the minimum team. And how do you scale? So how do you go from the minimum down in the bottom left there to the dream team at the top right? The vertical axis is team maturity. So you're growing, you're using data more, and you're getting a return on investment from your analytics team. And the time scale is on the right. Is the horizontal, moving left to right. This time scale could be months, it could be years. It quite often is measured over a number of years, and you're simply adding more people to the team. Um, the order is not important here. I just give this as a typical scenario. Once you have your um, tactical analyst, it's a natural step to add a strategic marketing analyst. They work hand in hand, they work together, different scope, different timeframes, but it's very much a joint partnership that once that's in place, that's all about traffic acquisition. The next thing really you tend to want to achieve is better conversion rates. Um, so this isn't set in stone, but you tend to add a strategic marketing analyst, then a conversion optimization analyst, and then you take more ownership of your technical aspects and the data techniques with the data scientists. And as you do that, you obviously reduce your reliance on any kind of third party. So by the end of it, if you have a dream team, you probably don't need to work with a partner at all. But you cover your holes, your data holes, with a partner until you're in that position. So this is the last section then, recruiting analysts. This is a difficult task. This is hard. I've been doing it a long time. I've probably recruited something like, I don't know, 20, maybe a few more analysts, as I say, both for myself, my own teams, and for other people. It is tough. It's tough around the world in all markets. Um, these people that are comfortable with data that can essentially solve problems are difficult. I mean, they're analytical people. They take nothing at face value. They're always trying to assess um, what they're doing. They're not gamblers, in other words. They're evidence-based thinkers, so they're always looking for evidence to make sure that they're making decisions based on something tangible. But they're also creative. Um, Normally, kind of left brain, right brain. It's difficult to find someone that's good at both of those things, analytical and creative. But by creative, what I mean is they can take a sideways look at data. In other words, quite often when you do analysis, if you do the sort of drill down and segmentation and cross-referencing and correlation, sometimes in fact, quite often, you just don't get an answer. And sometimes you can get a contradictory answer. And it takes someone to take a step back and look sideways at the data and make a jump. And sometimes it can be a very big approximation because you have to guess. Um, but it takes someone, to move the process forward, and that's why you need creative thinkers as well. So let's just look at some of the characteristics of these people. I give credit here to Greta Roberts from Talent Analytics, who listed these out in a blog post a year or so ago, 2 years ago. And I just felt there's a few more of these I haven't listed, but I just felt that this rings so true. I mean, basically looking at myself with this bullet list, but also the people that I've hired and the people that I've worked with. If you look at this list, they have a high cognitive attitude and search for deeper knowledge about everything. So, in other words, what I'm saying here, or what Greta's saying here, is this isn't about just doing your 9 to 5 job and being analytical. Then, analysts are analytical throughout their whole lives. They are maybe born like that, but they gain that kind of questioning approach to life at a very early age. They develop it at school. They gain a broader interest and perhaps go on to university and study those type of techniques as part of another subject, like economics, like science, like engineering, like maybe philosophy. Um, it's really a way of thinking. It's not just something you go to a few workshops on and become an analytical thinker. It's the type of person you are. Uh, they are creative. We talked about that, but they want to create elegant solutions. So, in other words, that will do is never a phrase you'll hear a good analyst say. They'll want to be robust about it and make sure that it is true, because if it's false, if what the assumption they built a hypothesis on is wrong, it's going to come back and make them look foolish. So, um, solutions and making sure it's a well-built, robust, elegant solution is important to them. Um, have a strong desire to do things the right way, kind of tied to the previous bullet point. Have a high sense of quality, standards, so detail orientation. So this comes back to, when you look at data, one of um, the first things a good analyst will say when they see something unusual in the data, a big spike or a big trough, for example, is it real? Where does that come from? What does it mean? Never take it at face value. They will want to go and look at the quality of the data. Is this a real thing that I've seen, or is it just an artifact or some kind of error? The next one is an interesting one. Restrained. So what am I on now? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Bullet 5. Restrained and less verbal at team meetings. Unless asked for input or the topic is of high importance to their perspective, you're unlikely to find analysts jumping up and giving their point of view. And the reason why I highlight that is because, in these days of data visualization and data-driven decisions, analysts really need to be able to communicate their findings very well. It's no good if just they understand it. Non-analysts, people outside of the team, people who may not have a strong understanding of statistics at all, have to make decisions based on that data. So clear explanations, pedagogical explanations are very important. But clearly, the type of person that an analyst is not an extrovert. They're not there at great public speakers. So this is something to be aware of, and something that I recommend is developed internally with training, rather than you go out there looking for extroverts, because then you end up looking for unicorns, extrovert analysts. I guess it can happen, but it's very, very rare. And then the last one is, these analysts take, they take calculated, educated risks. I think I mentioned this before. They're not gamblers. They do the thoughtful analysis, and they are happy to take a risk once they've thought through all the consequences and outcomes. So I mentioned, don't look for unicorns. Be very specific. And you quite often see people looking for unicorns because they mix analyst roles. So they take a little bit of the expertise required in marketing, and a bit of expertise required in the technical side of things, and a little bit of expertise in conversion optimizations, and build a job role which is, well, essentially written for a superhuman, and doesn't exist. So that's why, I spent a bit of time at the beginning talking about working with partners to fill in the gaps, not trying to take one person to be essentially a jack of all trades. Um, And we used this radar approach earlier about mapping out your stakeholders' needs. Use this to map out your skill set as well. What skills do you have in these particular areas can help you identify what people you need to hire. And here's a role description. I'm not going to read this through it. I will leave it to you to pick up later. This webinar is recorded, and also slides will be available. I just highlight some of the things. I really like this job description. I put this in the book. I have a couple of bad examples as well of how not to do it. This one I really like. Um, and the ones that I've sort of highlighted are underscored there. If we start at the top, it's talking about quality analysis and insight to the business. So it's really pushing the idea that it's not data that you're delivering to the business. This job role description is about insights to the business, and that really sets the standard in terms of what this role is about. So I like that approach right at the very first paragraph. Again, in the second paragraph there, it's about response to business questions. So the business asks a question, and it's the analyst's role to go and figure out how best to answer it. In other words, what data is required. Maybe it's straight out of Google Analytics, maybe it's another data source, or maybe it's a combination of both. So the business drives the question, the answer, and how to answer it comes from the analyst. So again, a very good setting of the scene here. And then the terms persuasive presentations and engaging reporting. I mean, they're really avoiding here. The person who wrote this knows absolutely what they're doing. I mean, this is a very smart job description. Um, what they're trying to say is we want someone with great presentation skills, but they know combining that with the other skills they also need, you're in the unicorn territory. No point in scaring people or putting off the right people by saying you have to stand up in front of the CEO and report to them every week or every month. So just the fact that a good analyst will be very pedagogical. We talked about this in the character sets. They like to educate other people. Learning is a big part of what analysts like to do, as well as passing on their learnings. And the persuasive presentations and engaging reporting fits well with that. Robustly and accurately. I mean, this comes back to the attention to detail and quality control. That's very much aimed at analysts. And then towards the bottom here, there's three areas of underlined, which kind of all tie into the same theme of education. So, championing and testing and measuring culture, running workshops, making sure that information is understood within the business. Analysts love to learn; they love to grow their knowledge. Um, it's why it's actually why most analysts, good analysts, end up working for agencies because they're in an environment where you're constantly learning. You're working for multiple clients, often at the same time. You'll be multitasking, a handful of clients. You work in different sectors, different verticals, finance one day, travel another, automotive maybe the next. And you work in different type of websites. So it could be e-commerce or non-e-commerce or lead generation or whatever. So analysts love to be in a learning environment, and those last two paragraphs really appeal to that. Um, it is, of course, possible to recruit good analysts into a corporate environment. The problem is after year one, year two, the inference is you tend to be doing the same thing again. You do the initial heavy lifting, the initial data analysis in those first couple of years of your job. Then what? You're just kind of recycling. So it's not attractive generally for analysts to go and work in corporations. So it's really important that if you are in that situation, if you are a large corporate and you're trying to attract analysts, the learning and growing of people's knowledge is important to them. And I'm going to finish pretty soon now, so I'm going to, I think, end on this last slide. Some interview questions that I've used. Of course, you have very specific ones. If you're recruiting a technical analyst, you want to make sure, for example, they understand the difference between first-party cookies and third-party cookies. That's a very technical question. But beyond that, these are the sort of questions that I get candidates to ask. It's not something I do on the first interview. It's, if they've been screened and they come back for a second interview, I ask these questions. Sometimes I even mail them in advance. One here, describe an example of when you have worked with stakeholders to define key performance indicators. Um, like what I'm looking for here is a real sort of structured process, or at least structured thinking to the process. Who were the stakeholders and how were they selected? Why were they selected? Um, how are expectations managed? Stakeholders, they're not analysts. They're not going to be working in the analytical team. They usually want everything all at once. So managing expectations is very important. How were KPIs delivered and what actions, of course, were taken as a result of that. So I'm really looking for a story there to understand, what worked and also perhaps what didn't work. What metrics do you use to determine success? Great interview question. Could be thought of a little bit unfair. Like I say, this isn't for first interviews. It's for a follow up, and it really helps you figure out, I guess, the experience or the seniority of the person that you're recruiting. It's a trick question. At the end of the day, there is no set of key performance indicator key performance indicators. There is no sort of silver bullet metrics that will help you define success. It's the business. It's the business that determines what success. So success to one stakeholder could be very different to another. Some stakeholders may just want to know traffic numbers, and that's success to them. So it's the business that determines that, and it's the analyst's role to go and figure out how to measure that and then display it and report it. And then the last one is, talk through an advanced accomplishment you've achieved with data. And this doesn't have to be anything to do with web. And this comes down to storytelling ability as well. Very easy for candidates to get muddled on this and tell a very confusing story. So I'm looking for clarity, making sure the issue that they've identified, the accomplishment, what they achieved, what they fixed, is very clearly defined. And obviously the analytical capability, the thinking, what hypothesis did they have, or alternatively, what data did they have, which they then built the hypothesis from. And it really shows critical thinking. So I'll do my quick summary. Obviously, a big thank you for your time listening. Very much appreciate it. Those are the areas I've covered. Naming the team. Don't be the data team. You're just setting expectations wrong from the get-go. Positioning within the organizations. Aligning with stakeholders is a good thing. You want multiple stakeholders because they will multiply your investment, and the more they want of you, the more they're going to be prepared to invest in you. And then when it comes to building it, there are 5 roles to cover. If you don't have the ability to fill all 5 roles with full-time positions, then look for partnering with a third party, a GACP. Nothing wrong with outsourcing, to a third party, but please make sure you have the minimum team in place to coordinate everything. Otherwise, you'll end up rapidly in a silo, literally within months. And then scale up. Position yourself, do the radar charts, and make sure you scale up and that you're transparent with the GACP. Oh, and last one, unicorns. Yeah, don't go looking for those. Be very, very specific in the job description that you're looking for. Thank you.
Brian, thank you so much. Wonderful presentation. I was taking notes as you were going through it. We only have a few minutes left, but wanted to ask you a few questions that were posted. One very interesting question is how do you maintain the interest in the job on your team? So data analytics is very hot right now, and people want to be doing this. But 2, 3 years down the road, how do you keep people interested in this?
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned that briefly there in the slides, and I hope it came across. It's creating this environment of learning. That's why agencies do such a good job of hoovering up all of the best talent. It is, although it's a technical area, it is a very creative area. Analytics, you're problem solving. Basically, you're just trying to take a bunch of numbers and figure out what the hell's going on. Those type of creative industries, like web design, like marketing, they do gravitate towards agencies where there's multitasking and lots of different things happening in a creative learning environment. So if you want to keep them in a corporate environment, then learning is the I think I read a survey somewhere. I can't remember where it was, but when analysts were asked what are the most important things to their job, Learning, I think, was number one, the ability to learn and grow knowledge, and salary, how much they get paid, was number two. So it's actually more important to analysts to be in a learning, growing environment than it is to get paid more, which is, there's not many industries like that, but that's certainly one of them.
Great. And another question that we got. So we talked about building a team, but what are the best leadership tactics to manage an analytics team? How do you successfully manage it?
Yeah, I mean, what I find is quite often that isn't done. It's like, yeah, we need data, go and get the data. And it's often outsourced, as I showed in one of my slides. The management process is, if you can make it work, if you have the resources, that's the first thing. But the management process is really, I think, allowing you, you're going to recruit smart people. And it's a challenge as a manager when you recruit smart people. Those people are probably, if not right at the beginning, but certainly over time, going to be smarter than you. So even if you're the smartest person, you join the team first and you become the manager, you're going to be recruiting people that are smarter than you, and it is a challenge, to manage people that are smarter than you are. And so the important thing is to let them get on with it, let them do their roles, and for you to focus. Essentially, not to micromanage, not to try and do analysis yourself, but focus on being a good manager. Um, this is just to let you into a sort of insight into me. This is why I left Google, because in order for me to do my job, I was going to have to move away from doing analysis and being a practitioner, and focus on being a manager. It's a very different job role, and it wasn't for me. So it's something to think about, as a manager. Is you have to move away from the nitty gritty, micromanaging. You have to let people get on with it, and people who are, at the end of the day, going to be smarter than you.
Excellent. Brian, throughout the presentation, you spoke about working with an agency or JCP company. Uh, and you also spoke about doing this in-house or combination. An interesting question came about what if you've been working with an agency for quite some time, but maybe because of the price, you want to bring this capability completely in-house.
Mm.
How should you structure the transition so it is smooth?
Yeah, I mean, a good agency should be happy to do that for you. Obviously, I work in an agency just like you do. It's never great to lose clients in that way, but a good agency should be well aware of that in advance. I'm assuming that both sides of the partnership are transparent, so they should be know that they are, growing the client to a stage where they're going to be self-sufficient, and that's nothing wrong with that, and perfectly right. Let me just bring that slide up. Um, so, a good agency should have good documentation in order to hand over, in terms of, explaining what they did, and what they didn't do, and what's outstanding. But also, you need to figure out, I think before doing that, one of the things, because you mentioned price there, and I often find that is a false premise to make the decision on, is you really need to, as a company, as an organization, figure out, what is, well, essentially, what is the return on investment for measuring your return on investment? So you're measuring the return on investment. What is the return on that? So if you spend, I don't know, $10,000 a month with a GACP, um, it's going to cost you, if you have those 5 roles in your organization, it's going to cost you, I would suggest, potentially more than $10,000 a month. So you have to figure out, before you make that decision, how do the numbers work out? Because unless you have all those 5 roles covered in the dream team, you're missing something. And that can make a big difference in terms of missed opportunities or mistakes, or whatever. So, measure, what is the ROI? If you spend $10,000 a month, or even a year, or whatever it is, what's your return on that? And if you don't know the answer to it, go and do that calculation, because just to spend $10,000 or $100,000, or whatever it is, and just to get data, that's not the answer you want. You want to say, okay, we spent this money, and we increased our conversion rate by 50% or 20%, or whatever it is, and then you can put a monetary amount on it, because every lead to a business has a value, and every, obviously, transaction has a value. So You know how much you spent, you've got, and how much you get back. So measure that for your partner, and then figure out what it's going to cost you to do this internally.
So an interesting question to follow up came from Nadine. How do you build the case for analytics team? And I suspect it's tied to ROI, right? But how do you build a case for the ROI that you might have when you build this analytics team?
Yeah, I mean, to build a case for investment, you need a senior person, a senior sponsor, um, to do this with you. So, I've been in this position myself where I've been all on my lonesome, and you have to try and fight for budget and resources. Um, Within an organization, it doesn't work. You need people to support you, sponsors to support you, and that's your stakeholders. So the first thing you've got to do is to go around and figure out who your stakeholders are, and it may be all of the people on my list, or it may just be one or two, because the other people are focused on other things. The other departments are looking in other directions at this time. They will come around eventually, but it's not. Sometimes it's not possible to have all of the stakeholders lined up all of the time. So find your stakeholders, find the people that are who buy into what you're trying to do. And that's why naming of the team, which I said at the very beginning, is so important. If you go in there and say, look, I want to establish an ROI team, I don't know a senior manager that would not be interested in that just by the name of what you've given your team. So get your stakeholders involved, and then get them to buy into what you're trying to do, and explain to them, what's going to be involved, and what the potential costs are. And costs are staff, and costs are also tools. And as Avinash Kaushik famously said about 10 years ago when I first met him, um, he has this 90-10 rule. You spend 90% of your budget should be spent on people, the people that can make decisions and make things happen and spot opportunities and things like that for you, and 10% on the actual tools, which is the boring data collection stuff. Um, so with that in mind, you need to go to your stakeholders and put together the proposal, which is, this is what we want to do, this is what it's going to take in terms of resource, and hey, therefore this is the budget, and start building up supporters for you, because it's probably unlikely one stakeholder is going to go for all of that. But if you can get two or three together, there's a potential to share that budget. But you need a senior a sponsor of what you're trying to do, a senior manager that brings to the table trust, unless you are, of course, that senior manager.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Brian. I know we are quite a bit over time, so thank you everyone for submitting your questions. And I think some of the questions really had to do with the concept of making data interesting, making data exciting, or telling a story with data. And we are very happy that Brian will also be joining us for our next webinar, which is storytelling with web analytics. That will take place on June 3rd. And in this webinar, Brian is going to share some key studies, how organizations have used data to share a story and to really do something extraordinary, do something different with analytics. Brian, any promotions for this program? Anything that you will be sharing with people who will be attending?
You caught me off guard there, Michael.
Ah,
Um,
well,
it will be interesting. These are, again, it's all the collective thoughts and years of experience I've put into the last book that I did. So it will be a case study from. If anyone's got the book, that would be great. It's a case study from chapter 10, and all of those have had significant impact. To the bottom line, to revenue, to customers. So I'm thinking, I haven't actually decided which one. I'm thinking one of them's likely to be about silos. Is your website a silo? How to understand if visitors are trapped in one section of your website, or whether they go off exploring other sections. So that's kind of where I'm going, I think.
well, fantastic. Brian, again, thank you so much. And thank you everyone for joining the session. I believe that everyone will have a huge ROI about this information that was presented with us and applying this to our everyday businesses and business cases. And I hope to see everyone again on Wednesday, June 3rd, when we'll talk about storytelling with web analytics. Um, Good day, good night, everyone.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.